Would you blue water this boat? Would you sail to the Caribbean on it? Do you want to see an episode about your favorite boat? Throw your answers down in the comments, and if you like sailboats, give this video a thumbs up. It helps with the YouTube algorithmic witchcraft.
This week on Everything You Need to Know, we're talking about the CS-36.
What's the bare minimum sailboat that you would use to cross the Atlantic? And what exactly is a blue water sailboat? I get a lot of requests for this one in sort of the last few months, and I was kind of surprised people requested this boat because a lot of the requests came from my American friends from here on YouTube. And it's actually a Canadian boat. Last week we dove into something a bit different than we usually talk about. We all know the full keel heavy displacement monsters that most people agree are blue water boats. But we talked last week about a class of boat that is just shy of what you might consider crossing an ocean with. A class of boat that tends to be easier to live with on a full-time sort of a basis rather than a full-on ocean cruiser. And in most cases, they're a whole lot cheaper and more obtainable. Maybe we wouldn't use it to cross an ocean, but we would use it to sail the entire Caribbean. Last week's episode on the Catalina 36 got a lot of great comments from you guys, and most of you agreed it just barely met the requirements to be sort of a Caribbean cruiser. A lot of people said they'd be much more likely to use a CS-36, which is weird because that was made on the Great Lakes by a Canadian company, and I didn't even know you guys knew what that was. So what exactly is a CS-36, and would you take it to the beautiful blue waters down south? CS stands for Canadian Sailcraft. It was a company founded in 1963 by a man called Paul Tennyson. Back in the 60s, the epicenter of sailing in Canada, Ontario, the Great Lakes, was Toronto, and it was right on Lake Ontario. And Lake Ontario, you can sail out of through a canal and different things, and you can get to the ocean, or you can get to the rest of the Great Lakes. It's really a good hub for sailing in Ontario. So it only made sense for sailboat manufacturers to start popping up all around Toronto, and Canadian Sailcraft did just that. They started making boats a short distance away in Brampton, which is interesting because all of this is like within a 3-hour drive from where I am right now. The company got started like most do, building small fiberglass sailboats like the Corny Stingy, followed by a Caprice 15. The owner, Paul Tennyson, had a plastics company, and it was sort of natural progression that he start making boats. So he started making dinghies, and then in the 1970s, they sort of saw the writing on the wall. The sailing world was moving away from toys for the weekend toward bigger sailing keel boats. So they started making those. The real magic that we're talking about today, however, came in 1977 when Raymond came on board the company as a designer, and he created 3 very specific boats, the CS-27, the CS-33, and of course the CS-36 that we're talking about today. The company made a lot of different models, but they ended the company, the whole run ended in 1992. Lady K Sailing is brought to you by patrons, people who give a couple of bucks an episode to keep this channel improving. I want to give a shout out to this week's newest patrons, Mark and Dana and Bart. Thank you guys so much for joining the team.
What's that, though?
What?
There's more in front of it. Up it.
Yeah, that's okay.
This week on Everything You Need to Know, we're talking about the CS-36.
That was good. You like that one?
One more.
Okay. Quiet for a second. Now I happen to know about the CS-36 because for a lot of years, there was one in our club right here where I keep my boat. And I've had the pleasure of sailing on her, and I've had the full tour. The CS-36 is typical of what you would find in an 80s era, mid-30s keel boat. And everything about this boat is sort of typical, which kind of sucks. There are a few outstanding things that set her apart from the rest, and we'll talk about those. But she's a solid hull, she's a balsa cord deck, masthead sloop rig, keel step mast, comes in at over 15,000 pounds. So about the same as last week's boat, right in the right area of weight and setup for a small Caribbean cruiser. Keel depth, however, came in 2 variants, and we talked about this last week when we were talking about the Catalina 36 versus Lady K, the Hughes 35. The Catalina needed 6 feet of water, Lady K needed 5. And that foot may not sound like much, but throughout the Bahamas, I was able to get into a lot of different places my friends on the Catalina could not get into. I had the better anchorages, the cooler spots, all because of that 1 foot of keel depth. It made a huge difference. And this boat, the CS36, comes with two. It comes with 6.25 foot keel, the big fin, or you could get the optional shoal draft just shy of 5 feet. So I definitely go with the shoal draft option here. On blue water boats, one of the biggest things that you have to look for is tankage. You need to be able to carry a lot of fuel, a lot of black water, and a lot of fresh water for you to drink. And while these boats are not completely blue water cross oceans, the CS36 dwarfs Lady K's measly 30 gallons of fresh water because she holds some 83 gallons. And fuel is reasonable too, 35 gallons of diesel. You're still going to have some jerry cans on the deck, but that's cruising. Here's something we didn't talk about last week. While the capability and tankage are important, we should also be looking at which boat is faster. And that may sound silly, but when you're jumping from island to island, being able to outrun a gale or a squall, that's very important. Also important is when you're doing day hops with a group of people, being able to get to the next anchorage at the same time as them is very important. If you're slower, like I was on Lady K or like the Catalina 36, you show up half an hour after everybody else, and your choice of spot in the anchorage is really hindered by that. You don't get prime real estate. Sometimes you might not even fit in the anchorage, so being able to keep up with everybody else is actually very important. Now, we didn't talk about speed last week because Lady K, the Hughes 35, and the Catalina 36 have PHRF ratings in the 140s or 150s, which is sort of slow. That's a hull speeds barely in the high 6 knot area. The CS, however, has a rating starting in the 120s with a hull speed that will crack 7 knots. Now, this is an on-paper number, but if it's faster out of the box, that's not a bad thing. There are a few reviews of the boat as well. Michael McGoldrick said, the CS36 is very much a traditional boat in the broader sense of the word, insofar that it exemplifies the larger sailboats that were being built in the 70s and 80s. The boat doesn't seem to have any design feature which is particularly outstanding, but everything comes together to produce a timeless design with pleasing proportions. It's not a bad review. Another review in the spin sheet noted, I generally don't comment on the aesthetics of design, but the 36 is one of the best looking designs of the era. And I have to agree with both people. While the 36 is not particularly outstanding in any field, in any possible way you look at it, at minimum, it's a little bit prettier than the competition. Now there's two CS36s, the traditional and the Merlin. The original CS36 was actually redesigned, and the new model, the Merlin, started in 1986. The Merlin was 2,000 pounds lighter, however, and it came with smaller tankage. And it was the first to use Kevlar in the layup. That was an option. You could have regular fiberglass layup, or you could have a Kevlar layup. It also came with the option with 4 different keels. And they made it sort of lighter and racier, so that's the direction they took the 36. So really, if I'm going to pick a CS36, I want the Mark I. I don't want the Merlin, because the Merlin's the racier, lighter version. I don't want 13,000 pounds, I want 15,000 pounds if I'm going Caribbean cruising. So that's something to note. So if you're going to be cruising the Caribbean as, let's say, a couple, the cabin space of the CS36 is fairly nice. It's better than the Catalina, and it's better than the Hughes. You also get an aft cabin with a door and the typical layout through the interior. Typical galley, typical V-berth, the head and shower, everything you would expect in a 36-footer. A few things to note when we talk about the difference between Lady K, the Catalina 26 from last week, and the CS36. The CS seems much more at home with a set of davits on the back. And that's a huge deal when you're cruising. I was always having to put the dinghy up on the foredeck, and that's not only a huge pain, but what you don't think about is it's a lot of extra wear on the dinghy. Every time you hoist it up and put it on the deck, you have to flip it over, and it undoubtedly is going to rub the shrouds, it's going to rub the lifelines, and my dinghy had battle wounds from all of those kind of things, especially if you're in a blow or if it's wavy in the anchorage and you're trying to muscle this 200-pound dinghy up onto deck. It's going to get scrapes and rubs and stuff all over it. Having davits will save you money in the long run on having to buy a new dinghy. And when you're inside the cabin, the CS just feels bigger and more well-built. And as we said earlier, it's faster. The interior layout, fit and finish, it feels nice and more top notch than the competition. And I've sailed on all three examples we're talking about here. The CS is just, it's a nicer place to be. So, would you take one of these throughout the Caribbean? Let's say you have to start in Fort Lauderdale, go to Grenada, and back. I found 4 of them for sale on Yacht World right now, and 2 of them are on the east coast of the US, right on the Atlantic. And those two, the prices range from between 30 grand and 50 grand. For 50 grand, that's a lot for a 36 footer from the 80s. But if one could be had for 30 something, maybe. Would I take a CS 36 over the Lady K? Yes, in a heartbeat. The tankage is better, the interior is significantly more roomy, better designed, aft cabin on a 36 with a door? Yes, please. And it's faster. How about the CS versus the Catalina 36? Yeah, same story for the same reasons. Would I cross the Atlantic on the old girl? Honestly, for the first 2 boats, Lady K and the Catalina, it was a hard no. But this one starts to make me feel a little bit more comfortable, and I think it's because I've sailed on all 3, and the CS-36 feels heavier, and it feels more capable, and it feels more like a freight train when it goes through the water, and I think I'd be a little closer to saying yes for the CS-36. I'm still not quite there, but we're getting close. See you guys next week.